The small town of Ravenswood was known for its tight-knit community and quaint charm. Its cobbled streets and historic homes gave off an air of tranquility. Thomas Richards, seeking a fresh start, moved into a charming Victorian house on the outskirts of town. Little did he know that his life was about to take a dark turn. As Thomas unpacked his belongings, he noticed an elderly man glaring at him from the neighboring porch. The man's eyes bore into Thomas with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. Thomas hesitated but decided to extend a friendly wave. "New in town, huh?" The man grumbled, not returning the greeting. "Yeah, just moved in," Thomas replied, attempting to keep the conversation light. "I'm Thomas Richards." The man's scowl deepened. "Harold Johnson. Don't go messing with my lawn, Richards. I don't take kindly to people stepping on my property." Thomas raised an eyebrow, slightly taken aback by the hostility. "I'll be careful, Mr. Johnson. Didn't mean to cause any trouble." As Thomas continued unpacking, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing over, he caught Mr. Johnson still glaring from the porch. Determined not to let the grumpy neighbor ruin his optimism, Thomas decided to make the first move. Later that evening, as Thomas was backing into his driveway, Mr. Johnson stormed out of his front door. "You're parked on my lawn," he barked, pointing accusingly. Thomas, perplexed by the accusation, looked at the tires on the passenger side barely touching the edge of the grass. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I didn't realize." Ignoring the apology, Mr. Johnson thrust a six-pack of beer into Thomas's hands. "My name's Harold Johnson, and sometimes I'm a bit of an asshole. Why don't you come over and drink some beer on my porch?" Thomas hesitated, glancing at the six-pack with dismay. "Well, thank you, but I should get ready for bed soon. I have to work in the morning." Mr. Johnson waved away the excuse, snorting, "Maybe I will." He grinned at Thomas's resentful expression. "Listen, I'm sorry we got off to a bad start. I just didn't want some jerk parking on my lawn. I think that's reasonable, don't you? Otherwise, I honestly don't give a rat's ass what you do over there. Just keep your vehicle off my grass and don't make it a habit of waking me up before noon. Sound fair?" Reluctantly, Thomas replied, "Yeah, I guess that's fair," and popped open a beer. The two sat in awkward silence, the only sound the occasional hiss of a beer can opening. After a few sips, Mr. Johnson began to open up. "I've been all over, you know. Did all kinds of jobs. Planted potatoes in Idaho, harvested peanuts in New Mexico. Lived in Little Rock, Jackson, Fargo, lived all over the goddamn place." Thomas, intrigued despite himself, asked, "What made you move so much?" Mr. Johnson stared into his beer, his eyes distant. "Doesn't matter how much space you put between yourself and the past. It's always there." Their conversation took an unexpected turn, revealing glimpses of a troubled past. Thomas couldn't help but wonder what secrets this unfriendly neighbor was hiding. Little did he know that the tale of Harold Johnson was just beginning, and Ravenswood held more mysteries than he could have ever imagined. The following evening, Thomas cautiously approached Harold Johnson's porch, armed with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. The porch light cast eerie shadows as it flickered in the night, creating an atmosphere that matched the unsettling nature of their first encounter. Harold, seated in an old rocking chair, raised his beer in acknowledgement. "Back for more, Richards." "Well, sit yourself down. Got a story for you." Thomas settled into a worn-out chair, feeling a chill in the air that seemed to emanate from the tales Harold was about to share. The rhythmic creaking of the rocking chair filled the silence before Harold spoke. "I've been all over, done all kinds of jobs," Harold began, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. "Tour guide at the Grand Canyon, fire lookout in Big Sur. Just buggering around from place to place, always on the move." Thomas listened intently, the darkness of the night seemingly amplifying the weight of Harold's words. Why the constant moving? Restlessness. Harold chuckled, a bitter edge to his laughter. "Restlessness, you say? More like running away. Running away from things you can't escape, no matter how far you go." The revelation hung in the air, and Thomas, sensing the gravity of Harold's past, prompted, "What were you running from?" Harold hesitated, his eyes clouded with memories. "Doesn't matter now. But let me tell you about the one place I thought I could find peace, the movie theater." Thomas leaned forward, intrigued by the unexpected turn in the conversation. The movie theater. Harold nodded, a distant look in his eyes. "The wife and I went out for a nice steak dinner that night. Classy joint, good food. We had a good time, just me and her. Anyway, when we were walking back to the car, she pointed at a movie marquee and asked, 'Can we go see The Deer Hunter, Jack? I love Robert De Niro.'" Thomas sensed a shift in Harold's demeanor, a subtle change that hinted at a deeper pain. "What happened at the theater?" Harold's voice dropped, and he spoke with a haunted resonance. "The Deer Hunter. It was the first and last time I ever went to a movie theater. Haven't stepped foot in one since." Thomas, captivated by the mystery unfolding, asked, "What happened, Jack?" "The cops found me in the restroom," Harold murmured, taking a long swig of his beer. "I was hiding in a toilet cubicle. The guy I hit was an usher. Just a teenage kid. He was just coming to see what all the commotion was about." Thomas, wide-eyed, absorbed the gravity of the confession. "You hit someone at the theater." Harold nodded, his gaze fixed on the beer can in his hand. "Yeah, I lost it, Richards. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the war, maybe it was something else. I don't rightly know. But that night, that poor kid paid the price." As the night wore on, Thomas found himself drawn deeper into the shadows of Harold's past. The porch tales painted a portrait of a man haunted by regret and haunted by the ghosts of his actions. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the weight of Harold's secrets, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that the unfriendly welcome he had received was just the beginning of a chilling journey into the darkness of Ravenswood. The days in Ravenswood crawled by, and Thomas's interactions with Harold Johnson grew more frequent. Despite the unsettling tales from the porch, Thomas found himself inexplicably drawn to the enigmatic man next door. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet town, Thomas ventured onto Harold's porch once again. Harold, his weathered face etched with lines of experience, greeted Thomas with a nod. "Back for more, Richards? Can't get enough of an old man's ramblings." Thomas chuckled nervously, taking a seat. "Guess I'm a glutton for punishment. So what happened after the movie theater incident?" Harold sighed, the weight of the past pressing on his shoulders. "After that night, things changed. I realized I couldn't keep running from what I'd done, from what I'd seen. The shadows of the past have a way of catching up with you." As the night deepened, Harold began recounting stories of his time in the war, his voice carrying the weight of memories long buried. "I've seen things, Richards, things that stay with you, no matter how hard you try to forget." Thomas, intrigued yet apprehensive, probed further. "What kind of things, Jack? What happened in the war?" Harold's eyes glazed over as he delved into the horrors of the battlefield. "War changes a man, Richards. I've watched friends die, seen the brutality of humanity laid bare. You start questioning everything, your purpose, your sanity." Thomas listened. The shadows of Ravenswood seemed to close in around them. "Did you ever find answers, Jack?" Harold's laughter carried a bitter edge. "Answers? No, Richards. There are no answers in war, only scars. Scars that run deep and never fade. You think you can leave it all behind when you return home, but it follows you like a relentless shadow." The wind rustled through the trees, adding an eerie undertone to the conversation. Thomas, sensing the gravity of Harold's words, ventured carefully, "Tell me about the shadows, Jack." "What do you mean?" Harold's gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "The shadows are the memories, the faces of the ones you lost, the things you did. They creep into your dreams, whisper in the silence of the night. You can't escape them." Thomas, now a captive audience to the haunting tales, asked, "Do you ever feel like they're real, like they're here with you?" Harold's eyes bore into Thomas, an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. "Sometimes, Richards, sometimes I feel their presence as if the ghosts of the past are standing right here on this porch." The night grew darker, and a chilling silence settled over the porch. Thomas, hesitant yet compelled to continue, questioned, "Do you think we can ever outrun our shadows, Jack?" Harold's gaze softened, a hint of vulnerability breaking through the hardened exterior. "No, Richards, we can't outrun them, but maybe, just maybe, we can learn to live with them. Accept them as a part of who we are." As the night unfolded, Thomas felt a strange camaraderie with Harold, a shared acknowledgement of the darkness that lurked within. The porch, once a symbol of hostility, now became a confessional where two souls confronted the shadows of their pasts. Harold, his voice a mere whisper in the gathering darkness, uttered, "The war never truly ends, Richards. It just changes form, like a relentless specter haunting every step we take." Thomas, left alone on the porch as Harold retreated into the shadows of his memories, pondered the profound truth of those words. The mysteries of Ravenswood deepened, and the shadows seemed to dance with secrets that begged to be unveiled. A restless night passed in Ravenswood, and the air was thick with an unspoken tension as Thomas found himself once again drawn to Harold Johnson's porch. The familiarity of the ritual did little to ease the growing sense of foreboding that had settled over their interactions. Harold, sitting on the porch with a contemplative expression, greeted Thomas with a nod. "Evening, Richards. Got a hankering for some ice cream tonight?" Thomas, intrigued by the unexpected invitation, replied cautiously, "Sure, Jack. Why not?" True to his word, Harold led Thomas down to the boardwalk. The town was eerily quiet, and the dim glow of the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. The two figures moved in silence, the only sound the distant lapping of water against the shoreline. As they approached an old-fashioned ice cream parlor, Harold gestured towards it. "We're gonna get ourselves some ice cream." Thomas couldn't help but wonder about the sudden change in Harold's demeanor. The gruff neighbor, known for his reluctance to open up, seemed strangely forthcoming tonight. Inside the ice cream parlor, the bell above the door chimed as they entered. The air was thick with the sweet scent of confections, and a nostalgic feeling hung in the air. The elderly lady behind the counter smiled warmly as they approached. "What can I get for you two gentlemen tonight?" she asked. Harold grinned, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Double scoop of Dutch chocolate in a waffle cone for both of us." As they sat on a bench facing the lake, the night unfolded with an odd serenity. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional creaking of the boardwalk beneath them. Harold took a breather from his ice cream and groaned, "First thing I've eaten all day. I was hungover like a son of a bitch this morning." In a neutral tone, Thomas replied, "Yeah, I bet," waiting to see what was coming next. The quietude was shattered when Harold, seemingly lost in thought, abruptly shifted the conversation. "You know, Richards, sending our kids off to fight and die in a foreign land, no questions asked. 18, 19 years old, and off they go." There was a heavy blanket of expectancy in the air between them. Thomas sensed that Harold wanted to talk, but he wasn't sure if he was prepared for the darkness that was bubbling inside him. Trying to lighten the mood, Thomas tossed a piece of his cone to the seagulls that circled nearby. The noisy brawl among the birds provided a momentary distraction. In a moment of reflection, Thomas asked, "Is that how old you were when you got drafted, Jack?" Harold's eyes, shadowed by the dim glow of the streetlights, seemed to flicker with distant memories. "Yeah, I was just a kid, not much older than them." "But war ages you fast, Richards. Faster than you can imagine." As the conversation circled back to the war, Harold delved into stories that sent a chill down Thomas's spine. Tales of camaraderie, fear, and the brutal realities of combat filled the air. The innocence of youth lost in the jungles of a foreign land. Harold's eyes glazed over as he continued, "Sometimes, Richards, you don't know who the enemy is. You don't know who you're fighting, and it's hard to say who killed who. Probably 15 or 20, maybe more. None of them were babies." Thomas, grappling with the harsh truths being revealed, pressed further. "Were they all soldiers, though?" Without hesitation, Harold said, "No, I don't think so. But I can't say they weren't the enemy either. That's just how it is. There's always some collateral damage in a war. People get caught in the crossfire. The weight of Harold's words hung in the air, and the idyllic setting of the ice cream parlor seemed incongruent with the darkness that had been unleashed. The night deepened as the two men sat in contemplative silence, their thoughts drifting back to the haunting memories of war. The lake mirrored the shadows that played on Harold's face, a reflection of the nightmares that lingered beneath the surface. Ravenswood, once a tranquil town, now echoed with the ghosts of the past, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that the horrors had only just begun to emerge. In the days that followed the unsettling ice cream encounter, Thomas found himself grappling with the enigma that was Harold Johnson. The air in Ravenswood seemed charged with an otherworldly energy, and the cobbled streets whispered secrets that refused to be ignored. One evening, Thomas mustered the courage to broach a subject that lingered in the shadows, the fractured relationships that seemed to haunt Harold's past. As he approached Harold's porch, the elderly man glanced up, his eyes reflecting a mixture of wariness and guarded curiosity. "Evening, Jack," Thomas greeted cautiously, taking a seat on the familiar porch. Harold grunted in acknowledgement, a silent invitation for Thomas to proceed. "I've been wondering about your past, Jack," Thomas began, trading carefully. "You've mentioned bits and pieces, but there's a depth to your history that I can't quite grasp, particularly when it comes to relationships." Harold's gaze hardened, and he took a deliberate sip of his beer. "Relationships, huh? You poking around in my business now, Richards?" Thomas leaned back, his palms open in a placating gesture. "No, Jack, it's just, I want to understand. We're neighbors, after all." A heavy sigh escaped Harold's lips, as if he were wrestling with the ghosts of the past. "Fine. Ask your questions, but don't expect any pretty answers." Encouraged, Thomas ventured, "You mentioned your wife, and there was something about a divorce. What happened?" Harold's eyes, usually guarded, softened with a hint of melancholy. "Martha. She was a good woman, Richards, but war changes you, makes you into someone your loved ones can't recognize anymore. We drifted apart, and she couldn't handle the man I've become." Thomas nodded, sensing the pain in Harold's words. "It must have been tough." Harold let out a bitter chuckle. "Tough doesn't begin to cover it. She wanted to be with me, and then she didn't. Wasn't long before she packed her bags and left a note on the fridge." The weight of unspoken regrets hung in the air, and Thomas probed further. "Did you ever try to reconcile? To make things right?" Harold's gaze turned distant, lost in the recesses of memory. "I tried, Richards, but some wounds don't heal. I was a different man, and she deserved better. The war stole something from me, something I couldn't get back." Thomas, absorbing the raw honesty, offered a sympathetic nod. "It's tough when the world changes you, and you can't find your way back." Harold grunted in agreement, the lines etched on his face telling a story of battles fought within and without. "That's the thing, Richards. You can't go back. The past is a dark alley, and once you've walked down it, there's no turning around." In the silence that followed, the porch seemed to echo with the ghosts of relationships past. Thomas, choosing his words carefully, asked, "What about your children, Jack? Did you have any?" Harold's eyes flickered with a mixture of pain and regret. "Yeah, had a son. Michael. He was a good kid, smart. But he was drawn to the same darkness that haunted me. When he came of age, they sent him off to fight in some godforsaken place, just like they did to me." Thomas, sensing a shared pain, questioned, "Did he make it back?" Harold's gaze turned distant, haunted by the specters of the past. "No, Richards. He didn't make it back. He became another name on a list, another casualty of a war that never should have happened." A heavy silence settled between them, the weight of loss palpable. The porch, once a bastion of hostility, now bore witness to the unraveling stories of a man haunted by the shadows of his relationships. As the night deepened, Thomas, hesitant yet compelled to delve further, asked, "Do you ever wonder, Jack? Wonder what could have been different? What might have changed the course of things?" Harold's gaze, filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation, met Thomas's. "Wondering doesn't change a damn thing, Richards. We're all just prisoners of the choices we make." The porch tales, now entwined with the echoes of broken relationships, painted a portrait of Harold Johnson that went beyond the gruff exterior. Ravenswood, draped in shadows, held the remnants of love lost and lives forever altered by the unforgiving hands of time. As Thomas left the porch that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stories were far from over, that the ghosts of relationships past would continue to whisper their secrets in the dark corners of Ravenswood. As the days unfolded in Ravenswood, the bond between Thomas and Harold Johnson deepened, fueled by the confessions of a haunted past. The porch, once a symbol of hostility, became a sanctuary where two souls confronted the shadows that clung to their lives. One evening, a heavy pallor hung in the air as Thomas approached Harold's porch. The flickering light from a citronella candle cast dancing shadows, foretelling the gravity of the impending conversation. Harold, his weathered face etched with lines of experience, welcomed Thomas with a silent nod. "Sit down, Richards," Harold grumbled, a weariness evident in his eyes. Thomas settled into the familiar chair, the creaking of the porch floor serving as an eerie prelude to the revelations that awaited. Harold took a long swig from his beer, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken pact. Thomas, sensing the weight of the impending disclosure, finally spoke. "Jack, you've hinted at things, at dark moments from your past. Tonight, I need to know, what happened in the war that haunts you so?" The citronella candle flickered, casting eerie shadows on Harold's face as he began to unravel the depths of his wartime experiences. "It was Vietnam, Richards, a godforsaken jungle where sanity went to die. I did all kinds of jobs, planted potatoes in Idaho, harvested peanuts in New Mexico, Little Rock, Jackson, Fargo. I was a tour guide at the Grand Canyon and a fire lookout in Big Sur, just buggering around from place to place, always on the move." The distant look in Harold's eyes spoke of a man who had traversed the breadth of a troubled landscape, both physically and metaphorically. Thomas, hanging on to every word, urged him to continue. "It doesn't matter how much space you put between yourself and the past." Harold mumbled, his gaze fixed on the depths of his memories. "The war follows you like a relentless hound. I saw things, Richards, things that break a man." As the night deepened, Harold's voice grew softer, as if he were whispering to ghosts that only he could see. "There was a night in a movie theater, watching The Deer Hunter. My wife and I, we had a good time. Classy joint, good food. But when we were walking back to the car, she pointed at the movie marquee and asked, 'Can we go see The Deer Hunter, Jack? I love Robert De Niro.'" Thomas, now a captive audience to Harold's unraveling memories, waited in tense anticipation. "Well, I'll tell you something, Richards," Harold continued, a heaviness settling in his chest. "That night at the theater, something broke in me. The demons of war caught up, and I found myself hiding in a restroom. The guy I hit was just a teenage usher, innocent and unsuspecting." Thomas, absorbing the gravity of Harold's confession, hesitated before asking, "What happened, Jack? What pushed you to that point?" "The cops found me in the restroom," Harold murmured, his voice tinged with regret. "I was hiding in a toilet cubicle. The war had turned me into a monster, Richards, and that night it finally showed its true face." A heavy silence enveloped the porch, the weight of Harold's dark confessions hanging in the air like a thick fog. Thomas, grappling with the enormity of the revelations, finally spoke. "Jack, I don't know what to say. That's a heavy burden to carry." Harold, his eyes reflecting the torment within, nodded solemnly. "You asked, Richards. Now you know. War changes a man, leaves scars that never heal." As the night wore on, the citronella candle burned lower, casting long shadows that danced on the porch floor. Thomas, a witness to Harold's unraveling, saw a glimmer of humanity in the worn visage of the man who had bared his soul. "I don't blame you, Richards," Harold whispered, a haunted smile playing on his lips. "You don't know the demons a man carries until he lays them bare. We're all just trying to survive, trying to make sense of a world that went mad." The porch, now a confessional, bathed in the dim glow of the dwindling candle, held the echoes of a man's darkest confessions. As Thomas left that night, the weight of Harold's past lingered in the air, and Ravenswood seemed to carry the burden of a history that refused to be forgotten. The ghosts of the war and the shattered pieces of Harold's soul echoed through the quiet streets, leaving Thomas haunted by the shadows that clung to the very fabric of their existence. As Ravenswood sank deeper into the clutches of its own dark history, Thomas found himself drawn back to Harold Johnson's porch. The atmosphere had shifted since Harold's unsettling revelations, and an unspoken tension lingered between the two men. As Thomas settled into the worn chair, he could sense the weight of the stories that hovered in the air like an impending storm. The citronella candle flickered, casting eerie shadows on the porch, and Harold, nursing a glass of rum, greeted Thomas with a solemn nod. The quiet night seemed pregnant with unspoken words, and Thomas, bracing himself for what lay ahead, finally spoke. "Jack, we've come a long way, but there's still a darkness hanging over you. What happened, really? What brought you to this breaking point?" Harold's eyes, veiled by the dim glow of the candlelight, held a haunted expression. He took a long sip from his glass, the rum's warmth offering a temporary escape from the memories that loomed large. "Breaking point, Richards. We all have one. Mine was in the war, and it haunts me to this day." Thomas, leaning forward, implored, "Tell me, Jack. I need to understand." Harold sighed, the weight of decades-old memories settling on his shoulders. "It was in the jungle, Richards. The line in front of me kept getting shorter and shorter, and then it was my turn. I stepped through the door, and then I almost turned around and left." Thomas, sensing the gravity of the revelation, urged Harold to continue. "Left? What stopped you?" Harold's gaze, a reflection of haunted turmoil, met Thomas's. The girl on the bed was alive, but she was dead inside. The lights were on, but nobody was home. She was so young, Richards, too young to be in that hellhole. And I was too young to be the monster they turned me into. The citronella candle sputtered, casting eerie glimmers on Harold's face as he delved into the heart-wrenching narrative. "I wanted to turn back, to undo the steps that led me there. But something inside me, something dark and broken, pushed me forward." Thomas, now an unwilling witness to the unraveling of Harold's darkest hour, whispered, "What did you do, Jack?" "The breaking point, Richards," Harold murmured, his voice heavy with remorse. "I did things that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I can't undo the past, and I can't escape the shadows that followed me back from that God-forsaken place." As the confession unfolded, Thomas grappled with the realization of the darkness that war could unleash upon the soul. "You were just a kid, Jack, a kid caught in a nightmare." Harold's bitter chuckle held no mirth. "War ages you faster than time itself. It makes monsters out of men, turns boys into killers. I became a ghost of the person I once was." The porch, now shrouded in the weight of Harold's confession, seemed to echo with the distant cries of a war-torn past. Thomas, desperate to comprehend the torment that had shaped Harold, implored, "What happened after that, Jack? How did you cope with the aftermath?" Harold's eyes, a reflection of the abyss within, met Thomas's gaze. "Coping? There's no coping with the things I've done. The war changed me, Richards, and I carried its scars home. I pushed away everyone who cared about me, unable to bear the weight of their expectations." A heavy silence settled on the porch, the citronella candle burning low as if mimicking the dwindling embers of Harold's soul. Thomas, unable to fathom the depths of Harold's suffering, asked tentatively, "Is there no redemption, Jack? Can't you find peace?" Harold's bitter laugh echoed through the quiet night. "Peace? There's no peace for men like me, Richards. We're condemned to carry our sins until the end of our days. Redemption is a luxury I can't afford." As the night wore on, the citronella candle finally surrendered to the darkness, leaving the porch in an unsettling silence. Thomas, a witness to the breaking point that had shattered Harold's soul, felt the weight of the past settle over Ravenswood. The ghosts of war, too painful to be buried, whispered through the quiet streets, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that the breaking point was a shared burden that lingered in the shadows of their small town. As Ravenswood plunged deeper into the chasm of its own haunting history, Thomas found himself on Harold Johnson's porch once again, an unspoken understanding lingering in the air. The citronella candle flickered, casting a dim glow on the worn faces of the two men who had become reluctant confidants. The weight of Harold's revelations pressed on Thomas's shoulders, and the air crackled with anticipation as they faced the abyss that had shaped the older man's existence. "Jack," Thomas began tentatively, "we've walked through the shadows of your past, but there's a darkness that still eludes me. What happened after that breaking point? What led you into the abyss?" Harold, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the porch, took a deep breath. The creases on his forehead deepened, and he spoke with a weariness that transcended the passage of time. "After the war, I tried to fit back into a world that had no place for me. But the war had turned me into a stranger, a ghost haunting a life I once knew." Thomas, sensing the gravity of the revelation, probed gently. "Did you seek help, Jack? Talk to someone about what you went through." Harold's bitter chuckle cut through the silence. "Help? Back then, nobody wanted to hear about the nightmares we carried. They slapped a label on us. Shell-shocked. Crazy. I kept my demons to myself, drowning them in whatever numbed the pain." The citronella candle, now a mere flicker in the encroaching darkness, mirrored the fading hope that lingered between them. Thomas, desperate for understanding, asked, "What led you to the abyss, Jack? Was it the war or something more?" Harold's eyes, haunted by a lifetime of regrets, met Thomas's gaze. "War was the catalyst, Richards. It broke something inside me. But what kept me spiraling into the abyss was the guilt for the lives I took, the innocence I shattered. I couldn't escape the faces of those I killed, and the abyss seemed like the only place I deserved." Thomas, grappling with the enormity of Harold's confession, whispered, "Did you find any moments of peace, Jack? Any reprieve from the torment?" Harold's laughter held a bitter edge. "Peace? The abyss doesn't grant peace. It's a bottomless pit where every sin echoes endlessly. I sought solace in the bottle, in the numbing embrace of alcohol. But each drink only pulled me deeper." As the night unfolded, Thomas sensed that they were standing at the edge of an abyss that defied comprehension. The citronella candle finally surrendered to the dark, leaving them in a cocoon of shadows. In the unsettling silence, Harold's voice, heavy with the burden of a lifetime, continued, "I lost my family, Richards. Martha left, taking what remained of my shattered world. My sin." Thomas interjected softly, "Michael." Harold nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the porch railing. "Michael. He never got a chance to know of his father, only the shell of a man who came back from the war. My demons drove them away, and the abyss claimed another part of my soul." Thomas, unable to shake the weight of Harold's story, asked, "Is there any way out of this abyss, Jack? Can redemption be found?" Harold's eyes, filled with a haunted resignation, met Thomas's gaze. "Redemption is a luxury for those who can face the light. I've spent a lifetime navigating the shadows, and there's no way back. The abyss becomes a part of you, Richards. You learn to live with the darkness, or it consumes you." The porch, now shrouded in the impenetrable darkness, seemed to echo with the echoes of a man's descent into the abyss. Ravenswood, draped in the heavy cloak of its own history, bore witness to the unraveling of a soul tormented by the choices of war. As Thomas left that night, he couldn't escape the feeling that the abyss, once Harold's alone, had cast its long shadow over the entire town. The ghosts of the past, now intertwined with the present, whispered through the quiet streets, leaving Thomas haunted by the collective weight of their shared history.